still be a chance for Tombides. Can he score the winner? That is the moment to strike.
Hello and welcome to DT38 on the ball. I'm Rhys Ryan, and this week Nathan and I speak with Channel 10's chief football commentator Simon Hill. We speak about his love of Manchester City, why supporting a team in tough times is an article of faith, as well as his many incredible stories from covering football around the globe. So let's get on the ball with Simon Hill. Simon, thanks for joining us. It feels like a long time no see. It's been 4 years since I rolled up at your estate with my friend Jeffrey, and I watched that interview back last night, and it was a bit of a train wreck. I don't know how you didn't become an alcoholic after that interview.
That was a few years ago, wasn't it? But no, it's always good to give a helping hand to young journalists who are, trying to find their way in the industry and trying to learn things. So hopefully you got something out of it. Can't remember for the life of me what we even talked about, but
it was just beautiful being in your museum as well.
Yeah, with all my scarves and my football memorabilia. Yeah, that's right.
It's almost become the Australian Football Museum.
No, well, hopefully one day we'll get a real one.
That's absolutely the dream. And Simon, when I think back of your story, I think everyone in Australia almost knows it. If Colin Bell didn't have the guile and the dexterity on the football, do you think you would have become a drummer? Because you're an elite musician.
I don't know about elite. I'm a pop musician. I would have loved to have been a drummer full time, but I don't know whether it was ever an either or choice. That would be giving me too much credit for my drumming ability, I think. But there was a little window of time in my teens, which is a long time ago, as you could tell from the grey hair, that I played in a band that had a bit of interest. We had a management deal, and we had a records label that was interested in us making a single. But I'm talking about when I was 16, 17 here, and it didn't happen. And in many ways, I'm glad it didn't, because it obviously allowed me to pursue a career in football, which was, also my lifelong passion along with music. But maybe if I'm being greedy, if there's a next life, I might do the opposite way around.
So we could see a Christmas special then, maybe.
No chance. I'll stick to playing with my metal band in pubs. I think that's my level. And when I see some of the great drummers today, I'm nowhere near that level. So I'll happily dip my hat to them.
You're the Ringo Starr of the pub, I think.
Yeah, well, hopefully more John Bonham, really, but nowhere near his level. My all-time idol was a guy called Neil Peart, who recently passed away. He used to play drums with Rush, but that's all way before your time.
It would almost feel like yesterday.
Yeah, well, it does to me, because obviously, you probably, I don't know, maybe you do experience this, but life goes pretty quickly, and it tends to fly by even quicker when you get older, unfortunately. So, it's still, in my head, I'm still 18, but unfortunately, the body tells me a different story.
Not looking a day over 18, Simon.
Thanks, mate.
When you think back, though, to those greats of Manchester City, can you even imagine how quick the progression's been when you think back?
To where we are today, you mean? It's a strange one for me, because I grew up in Manchester, supporting City, saw my first game in 1974, which is an awful long time ago. And the club today is very, very different. I mean, it's almost unrecognizable from the one I grew up supporting. So with that, unfortunately, comes a little bit of a disconnect. And obviously that's exacerbated by the fact that I live in Australia, which is not exactly on the doorstep of Manchester anymore. So there is a little bit of a disconnect, but, it'll always be my club. It's the one I grew up supporting. It's the one my dad still supports. He's 86. My granddad supported all his life. My great-granddad played for. So, it's a family heirloom, really, that's been passed down through the generations. And, I'm very, very proud to be a Blue.
I thought the connection would be stronger now, because now that City are just winning everything. Before it was tough to support them if they were losing all the time.
No, you see that's an Australian mentality. That doesn't work. That doesn't work that way in England. In fact, the worse your team gets, the more you stick with them. I was there in the late 90s when City were in the third tier, the third division of English football, and our crowds that season actually went up. Because I think most City fans, myself included, almost saw it as an article of faith that, we had to be there. In fact, they needed us more than ever in those years than they do today. City don't need me today. They're a, multi-billion-dollar global player on the sporting stage. In the late 90s, they weren't. They were not even the best team in Manchester. I mean, I think they were the fifth or sixth best team in Manchester at the time. So, in some ways, I know this sounds very curmudgeonly and that I sound like an old man, which I am, but I sort of miss those days in some ways because, that was, for me, being the essence of a real supporter and, traipsing up and down the motorways of England to watch your team at places like York and Wrexham and Chesterfield and Scunthorpe. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but it was my club, and I felt a very, very deep commitment in those days to my club because they needed me and others like me. And no matter how bad it got, and it did get pretty bad for a few seasons, I determined that I was bloody well going to be there. And I wasn't going to let my club die. And there was a very real possibility of that in the late 90s. So, yeah, I sort of miss those days, but trophies are nice, don't get me wrong.
How do you think you view football differently compared to those days?
That's a good question.
Totally different light?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I mean, everything evolves. Obviously, it's generational, and the generation I grew up in was very different to the one you young lads are growing up in today. And you have a different focus, and you have different likes and dislikes, and football sort of evolves to change with the society it represents. I think some of the developments in modern football are terrific. I think, the sports science that we see today is tremendous. You mentioned Colin Bell in your opening spiel. Had Colin Bell been playing today and got the injury he sustained in 1975, he'd have been back within 3 or 4 months. He'd have had an operation, the latest keyhole surgery. As it was, that injury in 1975 finished his career effectively. He did come back briefly, but he was never the same player. So I think some of those developments are terrific. I think the modern stadia, they're wonderful amphitheatres. The Etihad Stadium, for example, it's a fantastically plush and comfortable facility, and no expense is spared. But have we lost something in terms of atmosphere? Yeah, absolutely. I miss the terraces. We got treated like crap when we were fans in the 80s. Maybe in some ways rightly so, because it was an era of hooliganism as well. But, I think we've lost that edge, that noise that we used to have, that passion on the terraces. And I do miss that. I think the game's become sanitized to a large degree. And some of the other modern developments, I hate VAR, as you know. I can't stand the concept of a European Super League. That's just about money. Has nothing to do with football. So I'm glad I grew up in the era that I did and experienced what I did, going on the football specials and the trains and the coaches. Even though it was a bit hairy at times, I wouldn't have swapped those experiences for the world. And even though City are now, winning things, which is great, I'm pleased I experienced the other side of it as well. I'm no glory hunter, trust me. I had 35 years of crap.
And I just love as well the connection with your dad. I don't know if you went to football with him or
yes,
your friends, but is there one moment or memory that you look back and you go, I wish I could experience that day?
Yeah, I think, so my first game was April 1974, which was City against Ipswich. And I think it was only about 5 or 6 years of age. And my dad took me, and I was probably a little bit too young to understand what was going on in those days. And I remember being there, but I don't remember too much about the game, or certainly not the results or who the players were. But it's amazing in childhood, isn't it, that just a few months can make such a massive difference. I remember in August of that same year, they played West Ham, first home game of the season at Main Road. And my dad said to me, do you want to go? And I said, yeah, I do. I don't know why I wanted to go because I don't remember the first game, but obviously there was something about it I liked. And I remember we went to that first game and my dad took me to the city souvenir shop, which in those days, it wasn't a superstore. It was literally like a prefabbed porter cabin, you know. And he bought me this rosette, this sky blue, white and maroon, or maroon as you say in Australia, rosette, which was City's colours. And there was something about that rose. I don't know what it was. You know how gifts that you get in childhood become very special. And I wore that with so much pride that day. And I remember seeing the team run out and those beautiful sky blue jerseys. And that was it. I was in love with the club and everything about Man City. And yeah, it's never changed really from that day forward. So I think that memory of going to that, not my first game, but the first game that I properly remember with my dad, and my granddad was there as well. So it was the three generations. So it was very much a male bonding thing, really. My mum was never much interested in it; she still isn't. But the three of us used to go every week, and that was it was a lovely part of growing up. That was our Saturday ritual. We'd go to the game, the three generations of us, and afterwards we'd drop my granddad back at my nana's house, and she'd cook us egg and chips, which, let me tell you, on a freezing cold day in December in Manchester, boy, it tasted good. So yeah, those memories are lovely.
It's so sentimental this morning. I'm loving it. Jeez.
It's a long time ago.
Running down my eye here.
It's a long time ago. Unfortunately, my grandparents are long since passed away, but yeah, they're nice memories to have.
Oh, so nice, and you were our gift during our childhood. So
well, that's nice to hear. Yeah, that's the generational thing again, isn't it? That things move on, and perhaps when you were growing up, you listened to me calling games, and maybe you fell in love a bit with football because of that, or because of what you saw on the screen, or a World Cup, or a team that you liked, or a player that you liked. We all have those moments, and yeah, that's why we have this connection right across the planet with this wonderful game.
It is, and all your sayings and your big quotes and the big moments, it's amazing how they just stand the test of time. It's almost like a big song.
Well, they're on T-shirts now, so you can buy them.
That's a massive plug.
Yeah. Well, I've got to do it. Striptease.com.au. There you go. If you want to buy one of those T-shirts, but it's not just about that. I thought it was a nice thing for me to do personally, because it sort of reminds me of some of the nice moments I had over the last 15, 16 years. Mostly with Fox, some with SBS as well, because the last 12 months haven't been that great. But yeah, it's nice to remember the good times.
I don't want to get too excited just yet before we go and dive into those moments at SBS and Fox Sports. But I remember you were saying that you went to Portsmouth University.
Yeah.
Did you study journalism?
No, in those days, it was actually Portsmouth Polytechnic. Back in the day in the UK, they used to split the higher educational establishments into universities and polytechnics. These days, they're all universities, so it is the University of Portsmouth, but it was Portsmouth Polytechnic when I was there. This was 1987 when I went, and you couldn't do journalism degrees in those days. They were very, very scarce on the ground. Things have changed now. So I did a degree in social policy and administration, which was essentially a mixture of politics and sociology and economics and all that stuff. And then I did a postgrad for a year in journalism, which was the National Council for the Training of Journalists pre-entry course in newspaper journalism, very long-worded title. And I wanted to write. I had no interest in broadcasting. My passion was always writing about football. So yeah, that's what I did. I did the postgrad after my degree.
Where did the big break come during that period? Because what a great place here, Portsmouth.
Yeah, well, Portsmouth, I spent 4 years in Portsmouth, and it's still a city that's very close to my heart. Still have friends down there, and I go and visit it every year. Well, when we don't have COVID, obviously. So when I was studying the course there, my first ever job in journalism was a part-time role writing match reports on the Portsmouth youth team, which played in the South East Counties combination. And I can still remember my first ever game. I think it was was it late 1990? Yeah. It was Leighton Orient against Portsmouth in this youth competition. And I travelled with the team on the team bus. I got paid £5 for my match report, which I had to phone in via, proper payphone with the coins and dictate, Portsmouth, Point Par, have drawn with Point Par, Leighton Orient. So yeah, that was my first introduction to it. But my first full-time role didn't come until late 1991. When I graduated, there was a big recession in the UK, so there weren't a lot of jobs in journalism, certainly not in written journalism. So I applied for a job in commercial production, which is essentially writing adverts for a radio station in South Wales called Red Dragon FM. And they wrote back to me and said, look, we don't think you're quite suitable for this, but we see you've interest in sport and brief experience with the Portsmouth Evening News. There's a job here as a sports reporter if you're interested in going for that. So, of course, that's what I wanted. So I went for that and got it. And I was away, but it took a slightly different path than I was anticipating. I certainly had no, desires to be in radio or television, but that's just the way my career went.
What were the moments like at Red Dragon? How were you as a reporter when you were younger?
Green, I think, is probably the best way to describe it. Obviously I was 22, 23 then, so I didn't have a lot of experience, and I learnt on the job, which was terrific, to be honest. It was a fantastic learning ground, really, radio, because I knew nothing of the practical, technical stuff of radio, even the hardware that we used, which, again, is, this is 30 years ago, so it's very antiquated today, but we used to have these cart racks and reel-to-reel tape and these huge recorders called Marantzes that, used to jog on the wheels and cut with blades and mark with little white pencils called chinographs. Today everything is edited digitally, but in those days everything was done manually. So, I had to learn all this stuff and how to present, how to develop my broadcasting voice, how to host a sports show, how to interview people, and then obviously later came commentary, which I didn't really have any training for, but I'd done sort of bits when I'd be out at games. If the presenter of the radio show would cross to me and there happened to be a chance in the penalty area, I'd sort of commentate it for a few seconds. But it wasn't really until I moved to the BBC that I did a full commentary, and I've not stopped since.
How was your first game like commentating for the BBC? I'm sure that would have been very nerve-wracking. It's like you have this incredible weight of responsibility on your shoulders.
Yeah, well, some commentators start off, in a low-key game with either a non-league game or a lower division game. My first ever live commentary was Chelsea against Blackburn Rovers in the Premier League in 1993 at Stamford Bridge. I was working for...
Simon.
Yeah, big time. I was thrown in... So I just signed for BBC Radio Lancashire, which was based in Blackburn. Of course, Blackburn Rovers were one of their local clubs that they covered. And at the start of this new season, August 1993, my executive producer, a guy called Guy Havold, said, right, here's how we're going to divvy up the sports show on Saturday. I'm going to host it and you're going to go down to London and call the game. And I said, I've never called a game in its entirety. And he said, well, let's find out if you can do it then, shall we? So that was it. Off I went to London, call the game. I must have done all right. I'm still going.
You're almost so lucky that you got that experience.
Yeah.
The job at Red Dragon, because we're almost in a similar situation now where we're in a tough economic spot and it's hard to get jobs, and you landed yours, and
I got lucky.
It almost feels like a different time where you probably wouldn't get the opportunities to commentate or to report and people to have the same patience.
Absolutely. That would not happen today, which again is another reason why I say I'm grateful for the era that I grew up in, even though I'd love to be younger. But it's you're born into the time you're born into, and I got very fortunate in that my sort of arrival into sports journalism and certainly football came at a time just after the 1990 World Cup when Paul Gascoigne's tears. I'm sure you've read about this. Obviously, I'm old enough to have watched it. And England got to the semi-finals, and the Premier League was just around the corner. So my timing really was perfect because the game just went like that. It was on a massive upward curve. And as a result of that, there were a lot of jobs in the industry. So I benefited from that. And my career sort of went on an upward trajectory because of it. So, you're a little bit more unfortunate, you guys, in this generation, that we've got a digital landscape now that is starting to take over from the old linear media. And while that presents a lot of opportunities in terms of you can get lots of experience, there's not necessarily the paid jobs that put food on the table for you. So, again, I've been very lucky. I've lasted 30 years in this industry, and a lot of people haven't. So, yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
And so many moments to grow. I'm imagining probably my favorite, story that probably lives with me is the one where was it the African Cup of Nations that you went to, Burkina Faso?
Yeah, that's right.
Was that probably your biggest learning ground for you to learn all your craft with players that you would have never heard, and did this almost quench the thirst for more stories and unimaginable experiences coming to Australia because you had that experience?
Yeah, look, I'd already been with the BBC for 5 years by then, so I'd sort of done my apprenticeship in many respects. I was working exclusively in radio in those days, and I'd moved over to the World Service in 1995. So I'd already had a couple of overseas trips, and this was the great thing about the BBC is that really at the World Service, the world was your story. You weren't limited to the UK or even Europe. If there was a story in Japan, that was your story. So I'd already been to Japan for a week on my own, doing a feature show called Sports International. I'm not sure it's still going. A whole series of interviews and features on sport in Japan. And when this opportunity came around in 1998, I'd already covered the European Championships in England in 96. And I knew I was due to go to the World Cup in France in 1998 as well. But this came sort of a bit out of the blue. And it was just... yes, in terms of learning my craft, yes, absolutely. But as a life experience, it was just incredible. Probably the most extraordinary 6 weeks I've ever had in my life. Going to a country I'd never heard of, Burkina Faso, in the middle of West Africa, with lots of technical challenges. Remember, these were the days before, modern satellite hookups. There was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no instant messaging, email, nothing. So to get the work done was a challenge. And obviously, you were then covering a tournament as well, which I didn't know too much about, and a lot of research on the players, but God, it was just, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. It was just brilliant. And I made some friends on that trip as well in the media that I'm still very close with today. It was a real learning and bonding experience for a lot of people, myself included. Terrific.
Tell us more about how you even researched the players, because it wasn't a time when you could in Google and you could find
Wikipedia or something.
Yeah, no, that didn't exist. Well, back in the day when I used to do games in the UK, I would literally pick up the landline telephone and call the press officer at the clubs if they had one. And a lot of clubs in those days didn't have press officers. A lot of the time you used to speak to club secretaries who were horribly overworked and weren't necessarily pleased to hear from you, and ask them to fax pen pictures over of the players. That's what we used to do. And then you would cross-check your numbers, your stats, with the old Rothman's Football Yearbook, which was a big, weighty tome. I've still got a load of them on my bookshelves here, that used to come out every 12 months with every stat possible from the previous season. So it was difficult. And also I used to keep my own records, literally handwritten notes of matches and players, and it's a different time. It sounds very archaic now, but at the time there was no other way of doing it. So you did your research as best you could. The bonus for a commentator, of course, is that whilst we didn't have access to Facebook and Twitter and Wikipedia, nobody else did either. So, they didn't know much about these players. So you were still giving them information that they hadn't heard before. So it was a good challenge and one that I enjoyed. I still do to a large degree. We obviously did okay, but I remember there was a game between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burkina Faso in the tournament, which was probably the hardest game I've ever called in my life. Without wishing to sound racist, that a lot of the Congolese players had names that sounded very, very similar. There was Roger Hitoto, Banza Kisongo, Lamana Trezor, Lualua. Everything was double or triple barreled, and a lot of the same consonants. So it made it very difficult linguistically to get your tongue around those players in the blink of an eye. Also the Burkina Faso team that they played, because they'd gone further in the Cup of Nations than they'd ever gone before, they decided as a mark of solidarity they were going to all dye their hair the same colour. So you had 11 guys that looked exactly the same. They wore green shirts with red numbers, which any commentator will tell you is the worst possible combination to try and spot numbers from a long distance. So, yeah, I was all over the shop in that game. That was a difficult one.
That's a commentator's worst nightmare.
It was. Wasn't pleasant.
I'm sorry we're taking you back in time.
No, it's good. It's good. This is cathartic.
Loving it here.
Now let's go to a quick break.
Hi guys, Simon Hill, DT38 Ambassador here. Just a reminder that on the 1st of this month, it is time to check your balls. If you don't know how, go to the DT38 page to get further instructions. Get educated, because as we know, delaying can be deadly. Stay safe.
What keeps you motivated and inspired on maybe we will reach the promised land of having great crowds and a great A-League, and we'll be able to do something one day again in the Champions League?
I mean, I've got to earn a living. And football is how I earn a living. So that's a big vested interest. I don't cover other sports. I have no interest. I know a lot of people say, I love all sports. Well, sorry, I don't. I love football. So, I only have one way to earn a living. So that's one. Secondly, obviously I'm very, very passionate about the game. It's not just what I do. It's who I am. It's who I've been since I was a kid. And I'm still as, madly in love with the sport as I ever was. So I want the sport to succeed. And, obviously globally it's dominant, but here it's not. And it doesn't have to be number one in this country, but it has to fulfill its potential. And I don't think we're anywhere near that. So until we get somewhere near that, I'll keep pushing on and, keep trying to keep people honest, keep probably upsetting people. I don't care. I'm old enough and ugly enough to look after myself. So, we've got to keep pushing on, and hopefully one day we'll get to a point where we think, actually, this ain't bad. We were almost there a few years ago. We're very, very close to it, and we self-destructed as we've done so many times in the past. We've got to stop doing that.
As you always kept telling me, we've only scratched the surface here.
Absolutely.
Sleeping giant. I want to ask one final one, Simon, because it's always fantastic to speak with you, and all these moments and memories, I've just loved them. But if you could go back to when you were 22, what would you be glad you knew?
What would I be glad I knew? I think I'd be glad to know that I'd have a 30-year career in football. I'm pretty proud of that, to be honest, because a lot of my peers didn't. and to, have worked on the biggest football tournaments on the planet, World Cups, European Championships, African Cup of Nations, Asian Cups, Grand Finals, FA Cup Finals, big internationals. Yeah, if somebody told me at 22, by the time you're 53, you will have done all that, I'd have said, wow, that's okay. Yeah, I'll settle for that. So, I'm a happy man in many ways. I've done everything that I wanted to do, and probably a lot more besides. I've managed to, travel the world covering the game that I love. It's allowed me to live overseas and to meet lots of different people. So, yeah, I think I'm okay.
Maybe you would have been happier not to know that you had done all these things, because it's part of the journey and part of the surprise and that achievement that it's not expected that you would do all these things, but it's
absolutely
through your hard work that you managed to able to achieve all these things,
and a bit of luck, a lot of luck, because as I say, you've got to be in the right place at the right time. And I was fortunate to, at least twice in my career, once to come through when the Premier League was just about to take off, which sort of got the ball rolling for me, and then coming to Australia in 2003. Geez, I couldn't have timed that much better, could I? Well, I didn't know that at the time.
As our podcast is for the DT38 Foundation, Simon, what has been your ballsiest moment?
My ballsiest moment. I think probably saying when I was still I wouldn't say I was a cub reporter, but I was at the BBC World Service, which was sort of looked down a little bit on by BBC Radio 5 Live. The domestic broadcaster was much higher profile than the World Service. And I remember at the World Cup in 1998, I was in Paris, and I said to the big boss of the BBC, there's a press conference on with Pele today. MasterCard, who is, sponsor. They're putting on a press conference. Are you sending anybody? And he was like, yeah. It'll, you won't get to him. It's going to be difficult, and you'll only get, 20 seconds. We're not bothering. I said, oh, okay. And I said to my boss at World Service, should I go? And he said, yeah. Go and try and get it. Give him a bloody nose on the domestic front. So I went to this conference. I've never seen so many cameras in my life. And I waited, I think, 2 hours to get to Pele. And they sent us in twos, right? So I went in with a guy whose name I've long since forgotten, from the Voice of America, 2 radio reporters. And they said, you got 2 minutes. So I let him go first because I'd spoken to him outside, and it was quite clear he didn't have a clue about football. He didn't know it. He pronounced him Peel, so he didn't even know. So I gave him the first question, and after 2 questions, his knowledge gave out. So I was like, right, I'm in. And I kept him talking for basically a full 5 minutes, and his mind was furious. Kept tapping his watch behind me, come on. And I just kept going, and Pele was happy to keep going. So I got a good 5-minute interview exclusively one-on-one with Pele. And at the end of it, got a photo with him as well. And anyway, came back to the IBC in Paris and breezed into my big boss at the BBC and said, I got a 5-minute exclusive with Pele if you want it. And his jaw just like, what? I said, yeah, you can have it if you want. Oh, yeah, please. Yeah, that'd be great. So I got a lot of kudos for that. So that was quite ballsy, I guess. There's probably lots of others, but that'll do.
That's the best one to finish off, Simon.
Not bad.
Thanks for all the memories and moments over, because our childhood is well and truly finished, but we love reliving it with you. And
that's great. I'm pleased to have played a part in it.
Thanks so much again, Simon.
Thanks for listening to DT38's On the Ball. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our podcast. Leave us a review and, of course, a 5-star rating.